everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you here with us. I'm Madison Niceley, our Customer Marketing Manager here at Bloomfire. Today's session is focused on a challenge that hits every frontline service and support organization. You can't deliver fast, consistent outcomes if your teams can't access the right knowledge at the right moment. And as complexity grows, more partners, more programs, more systems, that tribal knowledge, folders, and outdated internal tools simply don't scale. So today you're going to hear from Bloomfire's CMO, Dan Stradtman, and Jared Hancock, Senior Director of Technology Operations at Asurion's UBreakiFix, on how their team rethought frontline knowledge and operational enablement, moving away from that fragmented information and towards a search-first, AI-assisted support. We'll talk about what was breaking, what they needed from a solution, and the early impact they're seeing on employee confidence, efficiency, and service outcomes. Before we jump into that, though, a few quick housekeeping notes before we jump in. This session, as always, is being recorded, and we'll send that on-demand link shortly after we wrap, so you can rewatch that and even share it with your team members. Also, please feel free to drop questions in our Q&A chat at any point. We'll either address them live or follow up afterwards as time allows. And with that being said, I'll kick it over to Dan to get us started.
Madison, thank you as always. Really appreciate it. Welcome everyone. I'm Dan Stradtman. I am the CMO here at Bloomfire. I'm really excited to have Jared Hancock from UBreakiFix today with us. And like Madison said, we're going to dive into some of the efforts that he and his team have made to understand and to impact their high volume, high complexity frontline operation, as they in the past couple of years have rethought what knowledge management needs to be from the ground up. So Jared, first off, just thanks for being here.
No, of course. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Yep.
Just give a little bit of
so maybe. Maybe if for those in the audience who aren't aware, can you explain kind of what UBreakiFix does and how you serve customers? I know in 2019 there was an acquisition from Asurion, and you guys are going through this massive kind of growth. So maybe walk us through a little bit on UBreakiFix and kind of that 2019 acquisition on.
Yeah, happy to. So like Dan said, my name is Jared Hancock. I'm a Senior Director of Product Operations here at UBreakiFix by Asurion. I've been with UBreakiFix for 10 years. And as Dan mentioned, we went through a pretty sizable acquisition in 2019 when we were purchased by Asurion, who was at one point one of our customers. We did phone repair for them, and then they saw the value that we were able to provide. And so they went ahead and purchased us. And that was like over 6 years ago now, which is just crazy to think about. I've spent most of my career at UBreakiFix running different teams in the operations side, from the franchise support section to bringing on new clients and helping do repairs for different OEMs, to where I sit now in product. About 2 years ago, I moved over to the product team to help build a new solution that we were looking to do. We've got all of our technology that we do and that we use at UBreakiFix is homegrown. We started that way back in 2008 when we were founded, and we've just always had our own proprietary software. Looking into the future, the homegrown system that we launched in 2015 was just not continuing to scale back in 2024 and 2025, and we realized that we had to go through and replace it with something that was built for the future. And that's from check-in customers to all of the APIs that we use to connect to our partners to managing inventory. And also part of what we had built was a knowledge management system and a learning management system. So as we were looking at redoing all of that, that's kind of how I came to be here. Now, we've got 3,000 experts across the country. These are people who are, on the lower end of a pay band. They don't make minimum wage, but they're probably not too far above that. And their job's pretty complicated. We keep adding more partnerships. We add new devices. We add new products to sell. And that's not always easy. So for 5 years in a row, I think one of our key pillars that we were going to go out and do and accomplish that year was simplify the business. And it just never really seemed to happen. And a large part of that was how do we streamline the way that we get knowledge and all of this information that we have in our systems to those frontline employees.
So yeah, that's phenomenal. So, simplifying the business and that is, it sounds great on paper a lot of times. Doing it in practice can be challenging. So, as your team's kind of going through thinking what's next, right? How do you start to address some of the future looking things you want to be able to accomplish? Was there anything specific that kind of made you realize, the existing tools and the processes for the knowledge management element of this weren't as effective or efficient anymore?
Yeah, I would say when we started the company, when we launched our last platform, the one that we are moving off of today, we had no OEM partnerships. We had no insurance relationships. We were just fixing devices for people who needed them fixed. And that's pretty simple. A customer comes in, you check them in, you do the repair, you do it with quality, you do it with a smile, and you check them out, and they're satisfied. Your technicians have a pretty fun job. And that's great. But as we look to scale our business, and I think everyone's always trying to scale their business, the cost of that was complexity. We brought in partnerships with different OEMs. We brought in partnerships with different insurance providers. We brought in partnerships with different companies who wanted a scale discount that had national footprints, that they wanted their employees to get a 10% off discount, or whatever that looks like. And each of those has a different way to check in the customer, or a different box you need to check, or something different you need to do to ensure that you get paid, different SOP you need to follow. And that's hard to keep track of for anybody. We've got, I think, 45, 50 different partnerships, and it's hard to know what to do for the right customer at the right time. And so if you don't do things the right way, a lot of times you don't get paid for the job that you did, or you don't get paid the right amount, or there's some clawback in the future, or the customer is dissatisfied. So a ton of consequences that can kind of flow from the complexity that we introduce to the business, and the inability to quickly, and in a way that's going to satisfy the customer, and in a way that's simple for the tech, get the right answer at the right time.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you've got these frontline workers right there at the tip of the spear with the customer. What were they reporting or observing most frequently when it came to kind of knowledge gaps and those types of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few major things here that we saw were clear issues. And one is, how do you get them the right content quickly, which I know I just talked about. Another one was, once they find an article that is related to what they need, how do you make sure that that is correct, right? First off, our search functionality was not great. Search is hard. Search is hard to code. It's hard to build. It's hard to maintain. And we struggled with all of that. So how do you find the right answer? How do you know that the answer is correct when you find it? And then how do you make sure that it's easy to move from one person to another without relying on a single source of truth in the store all the time? How do you do that without missing SLAs and turnaround times and processing errors?
Okay. And then maybe one last question before we switch into a little bit on how you started to address things. Switching over from EX to CX, with those issues that the frontline employees were having, what were you seeing as an impact to that in-store customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, imagine this, right? Like, you walk into one of our UBreakiFix stores, you have your cell phone in your hands. We fix things beyond cell phones, but that's the easiest. It's the most that we do most of is cell phones. So you walk in with a cell phone and you say, like, hey, I need you to fix this. And it's like, okay, well, what program are you with? And you tell me, and then it's like, okay, well, hold on one second. I got to look something up. And then I've got to go to the back, and I've got to talk to, the guy who's worked in my store for 5 years, and make sure that I know exactly how to process you. And then I come back up and I'm like, okay, let me just go through the system, but the system's slow. And we've all experienced, scenarios like this, whether you're checking out groceries or you're at the mechanic shop. But you're about to give me your most prized possession, right? You probably have photos of your kids. You probably have business deals tied to this phone. You've been using your cell phone number for the past 10 years, whatever the case may be. Like, this is a really important piece of your life that you're going to hand over to me. And I had to run to the back to ask somebody how to even click the right buttons on the screen to check you in. That doesn't instill a lot of confidence that I'm going to be able to do this well for you. And when you start from a place like that, it's challenging to come back, even if we go out and we do the repair with excellence, and even if it's within the right turnaround time. So it's just not it doesn't build confidence when our frontline employees don't know the answers off the bat. Now, I'll say this, we have some of the best frontline employees that you're ever going to meet, and a lot of them are really, really good at this. But we don't want to have to depend on people who are excellent. We want to be able to have people we want to make the job easy for anybody to do, not depend on the people who are just really, really good. And that was challenging, and it's hard to give a good experience when that level of complexity exists in the business.
Yeah, that's amazing level of complexity. And you think about how expensive some of these devices are nowadays. It probably does feel like you're parting with something of great value, when you have to hand that over and you want to instill that confidence. So maybe switching gears a bit, let's talk a little bit about kind of starting to address issues, what systematically and kind of looking at some of the metrics. So you mentioned this earlier, and you and I've had a lot of conversations about this. Like you said, UBreakiFix was a company that was and took pride in making some great product in homegrown software. And you have and so I think one of those things was that point of sale system, which had its own homegrown kind of tacked on knowledge base. When you think about the limitations, especially as you look forward in the future, of that homegrown knowledge base, like what did you identify as kind of the biggest drawbacks?
Yeah, and you touched on something that's important there, and I think there was a lot of pride in the software that we had built and it had done great things, right? When we launched it, we were under 200 stores. It scaled us all the way over 650, nearing 700 stores, and that's a really cool thing to build. With a small dev team at a startup company before we were acquired, like that's really cool, and we were really proud of it, and we still are proud of the software that took us here. But as the business became more complex, there were just certain things that weren't going to scale, and we knew they weren't. And it turned out it was enough that we should go ahead and overhaul the platform. But one of those heaviest indicators of like, this probably isn't going to work at scale was the knowledge management system. The business was just complex in, I think, a pretty unique way. We're like, okay, you've got to fix an iPhone 12. So you go to repair guides for iPhone 12. Well, this is an iPhone 12 repair for a company like Asurion. They've got their own SOP. So do I go to iPhone 12 or do I go to Asurion? And then do I go to iPhone 12 and do those articles? Are they the same or are they different? And like, how do I know how to do the repair versus the process? And that all kind of lives in different places. So it got to the point where you have to do a lot of clicking to get from one article to the next, to the next, to the right content. And on the other side of it, our platform only searched things that were typed into the actual articles or into the titles. So if we had a PowerPoint embedded, or if we had a PDF embedded, or if we had to link out to an articulate module, none of that was searchable. So it got to the point really where we had somebody go through, and this was probably 2 years ago, just make a giant table of contents in a Google document so that you could use Control F and try and find what you were looking for. That's not a way to run a company with over 600 retail stores and over 3,000 places. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the world is littered with those stories, Jared. Of using duct tape to kind of slap things together when the technology needs maybe some improvement or updating. So. Yeah, I don't feel like you're probably the only company to ever do that. One of the patterns we see across our customer base, especially in those with really strong and heavily frontline organizations, is this idea of what I call knowledge gravity, right? So you have answers that naturally accumulate around the most experienced person in the room. That tribal knowledge is great, but very quickly can become a crutch too. So, you have this kind of juxtaposition of, yes, having that knowledge gravity is fast, it's familiar, but it's also risky because one, you guys are going through a massive amount of growth. So that type of thing won't scale. And then when those experts either take PTO or get sick or leave the organization, there's pretty serious gaps. So just wondering, like, how did that show up for UBreakiFix, or did it show up at UBreakiFix? And how did you have any like early warning signs on the road as you were saying, hey, like there's too much info in people's heads instead of the systems?
Yeah, I think so. I'll talk to the early warning signs first. I think it kind of masked itself at UBreakiFix because we were able to put all of the information into the system, right? We were able to store all of the right knowledge. So of course it's there. That doesn't mean it's easy to find. It doesn't mean people are looking for it, right? So as you see that kind of begin to develop over time as you're talking to people, and that doesn't necessarily come out in metrics, and it's challenging to kind of root out, but we were able to get there for sure. The UBreakiFix problem here is that not only the two things you said, like, well, there's an attrition risk and there's an incorrect knowledge risk, but in our business, you've got this person who's been at the store for 4, 5, 10, however many years. They like their job, or else they wouldn't still be there. But they probably like the part that's fixing devices or working with customers, or they didn't necessarily get the job to train the other employees, right? So if I've worked somewhere for 5 years, not only do I know the most, but I'm also probably your best technician. So you need me to be focused on fixing phones so that you can make the revenue that you need to make. You need me to be able to pump out devices and do complex repairs. It's hard to do that if every 2 or 3 minutes, Dan is coming back from the front of house and asking me how to check in customer A or customer C or customer F, whatever that looks like. So it puts like a pretty big hitch in your overall operations, because your best person now can't be focused on driving you the most revenue. They've got to be focused on how to manage the complexities of the business. And when those goals get misaligned, it's really challenging to run an efficient store.
Yeah, totally get that. So, you have these things that happen where, you've got, those knowledgeable employees. How is that translating into like, escalations? I think we one of the things you said is like, look, the search just didn't work here. So, do you feel like if getting search right would have allowed you to, help with those repeat escalations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's 2 ways that we think about escalations in our space, and it's similar everywhere, I believe. Like, we've got escalations where the customer doesn't get what they need, and that's the customer who's in our store who needs a repair. We have different escalations where I'm a technician and I don't know what to do, and my lead tech is off today, or maybe they don't know what to do either, and I've got to escalate internally to the support team, right? The same issues that we saw at the store level, where we had knowledge your knowledge gravity that you were talking about, where all of that was accumulating in one spot, we had the same problem on the support side as well. So like, when you call in for a support call, it's like, well, we got to find the right person who knows how to do this, because it's hard for us to find our information too. So, we had things like that. You have common things like device repairs. Those are actually relatively easy, and you get this mechanic down. You fix so many iPhones, and you know how to fix an iPhone. Samsung, you know how to fix a Samsung, Google, so on and so forth. It's the policies and the procedures that come along with those that make it challenging to go through the process. And like I said earlier, when you don't do it the right way, sometimes you won't get paid. Well, now you've got maybe a customer who's happy because they got a free repair because it was in warranty. It was supposed to be free for them, but you didn't follow the right steps as the technician. And now we've got an escalation where the franchisee who owns your store is going to call their franchise support person and say like, hey, I didn't get paid for this. Why? Then they've got to go through and say like, oh, we forgot to run this test, or you forgot to do this thing, or check this box. And so now you're not going to get paid. And now the franchisee's upset. And there was extra time that it took to go through that process, time that came to absolutely no value, because there's no revenue exchanging hands because no one's going to get paid. So you kind of had all of those things working together that were creating a pretty big problem.
Yeah, sounds like it. And, as we were kind of prepping for this, you said it even translated into some of the employee surveys you were doing around kind of their morale with the job, right? You guys are growing like crazy. It's getting complex, but that was having an impact on the morale. Can you speak any more to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, imagine you don't know how to, you can't use search in the platform to find the right answer. And you've got to rely on these Google Docs or whatever it is that you've got to do. You've got to go talk to Grumpy Dan in the back and get an answer from him. And you don't really want to do that. You're not going to be thrilled with the state of the platform, right? So we did some internal surveys, which you guys suggested we do before we move off of our old platform, which I think was a really wise choice. Fewer than half of our employees felt confident they could find the right answer. And then if they did feel confident they could find an answer, confidence was actually even lower than 50% that the answer that they found was accurate. So that's a lack of trust in the way the software works to find things. It's a lack of trust in the way the content is managed, that it's being upkept the right way. And what that drives is people to stop using our platform, and they talk to either the guy in the store, or they call service desk, which increases wait times and call volume, or they're looking for answers on Google, which are probably not going to be the answers that are the ones we want them to find. And, just none of those are really great outcomes.
No, not at all. And I assume, you start to lose morale a little bit, and then that impacts kind of the, throughput metrics or service level metrics, right? So, thinking about those, what was the impact on, those metrics, and then overall the impact on the support teams, that had these knowledge gaps?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll say overall, UBreakiFix does a really good job hitting the SLAs that we put together with our partners. But we could have done even better at those SLAs had we been able to go through this process in a faster way. Like, we consistently could have gone faster. We had technicians who didn't know how to begin a repair, and they didn't know, maybe they checked in the customer as quickly as they could, but it could have been faster, right? And then maybe they should have been able to start the repair right away, but instead they had to make a call to the service desk to make sure the program configurations were correct so that they knew they were going to get paid. All of those steps impact the time it takes to do anything, the time it takes to help the customer, the time it takes to start the clock and then end the clock for the partners that are watching. And like I said, we still do a good job getting it into the window, but we could have done better if we had the ability to get that information in the right way at the right time, and support customers, from a place of knowledge versus a place of asking questions.
Great. I mean, let's maybe switch gears now and kind of work towards a solution, right? Let's find that path forward that you had. So, you've identified, changes need to happen. You kind of understand the scope of the problem to solve. What was non-negotiable when you think about that next generation point of sale integration from a knowledge standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, the first and foremost, and you've heard me talk about it, I think in almost every answer I've said, is our search was broken and we knew that it was broken. And so the biggest thing that was on our list of we need to have this was a dynamic AI powered search. That was number one. Then we needed governance. We needed analytics to measure engagements. We need to be able to host different types of content. The tail was very long. But the main thing was an AI powered search that didn't just help you find the right answer, but could serve you the correct answer in a way that we had not had before. So we built out a little bit of a form and things that we were looking for, but like I said, number one, and I can't stress this enough, was we needed search to be best in class.
Got it. And then you get into the software. You're starting to put together your critical to quality elements of the software. Think about you're not just buying the software, you're buying the partnership too. What were you looking for in a partner to deliver this? Because I'd imagine, right, you've built much of your software stack in-house over the years. Right. So now you're taking on a partner. That it might feel a little unnatural to the company to even think of that.
Yeah, and I'll say it has been great to work with our partners at kind of the Asurion mothership, because they're much better at finding the partners and doing the negotiations and procurement and all of that stuff than we are. So it was great to be able to work with people who had done that before, because most of us on the UBreakiFix side had been builders. We built the things that we needed in the past. But we needed a partner that could deliver a world-class experience. They could help us close the functional gaps and really deliver everything we needed, which wasn't just search. It was file hosting. It was the ability to not just be a knowledge management system, but also a learning management system, which, me kind of new to the software search space, I didn't realize that those things were typically kept separate because we had built the one at UBreakiFix together. So we started looking around, and no solution really had everything we needed, which I think, to be honest, is where Bloomfire stood out, because you guys were willing to help build and partner and help us scale.
Oh, okay. So yeah, maybe, speak a little bit more about that. So, the fact, is you guys had some pretty, not strict, but you had some things you had to have. And as you went through the evaluation, there wasn't necessarily one out of the box, right, off the rack solution. So we need to go a little bit bespoke. How did Bloomfire provide that for you versus the other folks you were talking to? Hey there, Jared.
Can you hear me all right? I think we might have
Yeah.
a little audio issue there.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I just said maybe speak a little bit about how Bloomfire stood out when it came to the partners you were looking for.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, cool. So Bloomfire got us closer than any of the other solutions that we found. Like I said, we had an LMS capability that we really needed, that Bloomfire said, hey, we don't have that, but we're willing to partner with you and create it. We think that a lot of people would like the ability to have quizzes and have grades and then have an API they can call to see how their technicians or frontline employees or whoever it is are performing on those. The other piece, and this was huge, and I've said, alluded to this, but we were in the middle of a full-scale system migration. We were moving from our legacy platform to our next-gen platform, and we're still in the midst of that migration today. We've got 116 of our 680 stores live, but our technology resources are pretty occupied doing this other implementation, so we can't go out and build a knowledge base, but we also can't spend a ton of time hand-holding a third-party company while they do what we need them to do, right? So we needed somebody who could work really independently, who had a roadmap that was pretty aligned with what we needed and was willing to put some of our things on their roadmap. And then the biggest piece is we needed them to help us do the implementation and really be a driving force there, so that we could plug in where we needed to and then go back to what we were working on, and then plug in where we needed to and go back to where we were working on. And ultimately we landed on Bloomfire.
Okay, great. Maybe, for those on the call who are thinking more tactically, who are, thinking about doing this kind of exercise, how'd you set up your RFP? What were your scoring criteria? Because this is a change management initiative as much as it is buying software. So maybe give us a little bit of perspective. Obviously, nothing proprietary, but on how you were thinking about the RFP in this case.
Yeah, I would say it's probably pretty textbook, but I'm happy to walk everybody through it just so we can kind of understand the process that we went through. Whenever you're doing an RFP, you really shouldn't start with a list of vendors in mind or people who you want. You should start with a list of outcomes that you need to have, right? So early on, we kind of defined what success needed to look like. We needed faster answers for our frontline teams, better search, better discoverability, less internal development effort. And one thing that it may be unique to us or something that is what we deal with all the time is we didn't want a swivel chair experience where you had to log into one platform for your answers and log out of our platform and then log back in and move around. Like, we wanted the experience for the technician to be pretty seamless, where they weren't context switching from repair mode to find an answer mode, but they could try and do both at the same time. So we turned those into pretty clear requirements, and I'm going to make sure I nail these, but we needed a strong content and quiz management system. We needed permission-based access. We needed advanced reporting, deep search across articles, PDFs, videos. We needed an ease of integration with our next-gen tech stack, and then AI-driven search and content. So those were our, do you have it, yes or no? Do you have it, yes or no? And from there, we evaluated vendors on functional coverage, how mature was the AI they were using. AI is obviously really buzzy right now, and everybody's got it and everybody's using it, but not a lot of people have been using it for very long. So it was important for us that people had been using this platform for a long time before we got onto it. Integration readiness, compliance, data segregation, all of that stuff. So we looked at a wide range of options, including internal tools and building scenarios and things of that nature. We realized that, hey, we didn't have the time to build this with the quality that we needed to have. So that was kind of out. And then when we looked at external platforms, we really found that Bloomfire stood out with its best-in-class search and strong AI capabilities, the user experience, and their willingness to build a lot of those learning management quiz hosting platforms that I was talking about. and their willingness to help drive this with a really strong project management team.
For that, maybe switching gears into the kind of the final haul, right, when we talk about results. So, there's certain things I think you guys have already accomplished, more to come, but as you got into this, you're deploying it, you're implementing. How do you think this helped to make the franchises more self-sufficient?
Yeah, and let me start by going back a little bit. So Bloomfire, we launched it with the phase 1, which is where everybody in our platforms across anything, whether you're on legacy or you're on next gen, have access to the articles and the search capabilities that Bloomfire gives us, which is great. The only stores that is the only option we're forcing them to get out of their comfort zone, which wasn't super comfortable, to be fair, but push them to use the Bloomfire tool solely, are the ones that have migrated into next gen, which right now is only our corporate stores. That being said, we've made the platform of Bloomfire open to anybody. It is more of you click on a link, you've got to go log in, but then you can use the search. I think the best metric that I can talk through in this scenario is we now have about 12 to 15% of our network live in next gen, which is a brand new platform that they have not used before. And we just launched 70 of those stores a week and a half ago. But through all of that transition, we've been able to keep call volume into our support teams flat, which to me is a huge win. If you've got such a large chunk of your stores in a brand new platform, and you're seeing a decreased volume of calls from the stores that are in legacy and the stores that are in next gen, all of which are using Bloomfire. So to be honest, still a little bit hard to tick and tie that directly to the Bloomfire piece, but if it wasn't for Bloomfire, we would certainly be having a lot more support questions for the brand new stores and probably for our existing franchisees.
Okay. And, you mentioned kind of that intersection between learning and development, knowledge management, and we can get deeper into that if you want, but how is this impacting as you scale, right? How is this impacting maybe how you train or support these new locations that you're now building out as you scale the business?
Yeah, it's been really cool, and this is one of the things that I'm most excited about. So we think about new really in like 3 different buckets in today's UBreakiFix. You have brand new technicians who are coming into work at an existing store and have never worked at UBreakiFix before. Those are your new techs. We have new builds. So you could be a brand new franchisee or an existing franchisee who's opening up a new location, right? And then we also have this new group of users who are migrating from our old platform to our new platform. And they've got to be retrained pretty substantially and pretty thoroughly to be able to get into that new platform. In all 3 of these scenarios, what Bloomfire has really enabled us to do is train more of how we want. Like, we don't have to spend days and days walking through SOPs and doing like some of these rote memorization tasks that we used to have to do. We can now focus on how do we fix phones or fix devices with excellence? How do we sell the products that we want to sell that are valuable from a P&L standpoint? And then how do we search? If you need to find an answer, how do you go find that answer in the software versus, quickly touching on how to fix and quickly touching on how to sell, but then spending a lot of time making sure that they know the right processes and protocols. We've been able to totally change the way we train and focus on the things that are more important from a customer experience, from a store experience, and we can worry less about all of the details because it's easier for them to find those answers.
Got it. And so, I know you're tracking a variety of performance indicators, reducing escalations, improving repair throughput. I know it's early in the game, but how are you measuring the success of those or those in kind of in that view of the knowledge improving with Bloomfire system?
Yeah, so we're measuring success in a few different ways, but the biggest ones, and I mentioned these a bit earlier, is confidence and trust. So these are the leading indicators we're looking for. And like I said, we did a survey before we implemented, and we've done a survey after, and we've seen like a very clear step change in those metrics. So confidence has increased by nearly 25% compared to our legacy knowledge base. And so has and it's confidence in two different ways. One, confidence that you can find the answer, and then confidence that that answer is correct. And so again, to see a 25% increase in these metrics when we're still not fully utilizing the capabilities of the Bloomfire platform is really great for where we are in the process, and we're excited to see that continue to go up as we continue to utilize more of the capabilities that we have.
No, that's great. Maybe kind of continuing along the metrics discussion. In the knowledge management space, search abandonment can be an indicator that there's an issue. We've added in some abilities to do knowledge checks and quizzes to our software. What's been maybe the insight you have from looking at those types of analytics? And then, again, like early in the process, but any influencing yet of that, the ability to reduce those second level tickets we talked about earlier?
Yeah, so two-part question, and I'll take the first one. One of my favorite capabilities of Bloomfire, other than search, which I know I've hammered on ad nauseum at this point, is the advanced metrics. So one of the things that you can see is you can see every search that any user does, or any question that they ask AI, and then you can also sort it by answers that they don't find. So anytime someone asks AI a question that they don't find an answer to, we can see that, and we can go make sure that that answer exists for the next person who searches that thing. And that's been able to help like our content development team, our instructional design teams, our overall operations teams. Like we can truly make sure that people have the answers they're looking for, which is something that was so far out of the realm of possibility before. It just wasn't even on our radar. So that's been extremely valuable and will continue to be more and more valuable. Another piece, and you asked about the second level tickets. Like I've said, we've got some leading indicators that this is going the right way, but because we're still migrating off of platform A onto platform B, and we're bringing in the Bloomfire software kind of simultaneously to that, the picture is a little bit muddy. We do feel good about our leading indicators, but we're going to have a much clearer comparison when we review post-migration data after we're done. So like, what does it look like in the back half of 2026? That will give us a much better picture. So that being said, we do have some, qualitative data. We talk to managers, we talk to stores. They talk about how their teams are able to operate a little bit more independently, how they do utilize the search and what they utilize it for. And like I said, during our migration of these corporate stores to the next gen platform, that's what our trainers focused on, was how to use the K-Base Plus is what we call it. That's our Bloomfire site. How to use that to get the right information. And we've seen that transition go really smoothly, which is great.
So one of the things you'll hear, from our CEO Philip and just Bloomfire in general is, this idea of unlocking enterprise intelligence for an organization. And there's a few principles that go into that, but one of them is the ability to unlock tacit knowledge, right? So, this is, as we talked about earlier, that knowledge that's trapped in that, that employee's head who's been there a while or who has some, longevity in their position. Talk to me a little bit about, having this new system in place and the impact that it's been able to have on kind of unlocking or capturing that knowledge that used to only exist in that employee's head.
Yeah, so Bloomfire's got some really, like I said, really cool tools around analytics, and I think that's one of the biggest things. It also has some content development tools that help us do things a lot more quickly, right? So we are able to see trends in our service desk data, which is unrelated to Bloomfire, but what are people calling in about most? And then we have those answers in the service desk, and there are certainly people out there in the field that have that tacit knowledge, and their stores aren't calling. But then we can take that and we can, like, in a matter of 30 minutes, an hour, where before it would take us days or a week, turn those questions that they're asking and the answers the service desk is providing into articles in the platform that can then be searched by AI. So that's the unlock right there. Like, just the quick turn of what are the questions, they don't have answers, now they do have answers, and now we're back to the circle has been realigned. That is the best way that we found to do it, and we're seeing really good dividends from that.
And I would imagine, retail, what you're really looking for as as you think about your brand is consistency, right? That if I go to the Chipotle next door, that I get the same amount of chicken in my burrito that I do if I go across town, right? There's a consistency issue. Have you seen kind of the knowledge start to level the playing field on kind of consistency of experience?
Yeah, and I'll say this: our franchise brand and our corporate store brand, the UBreakiFix brand, we will always be on a march towards more consistency. And there is never a time when we will hang our hat up and say we are done. But you cannot have consistency if you don't have knowledge, right? If you think a program is supposed to be run one way, and I think a program is supposed to be run another way, we at our core we will be doing different things for the same customer. That is like that's not good, obviously. It's the epitome of inconsistent. So what Bloomfire has given us the capability to do is put those answers in more people's hands. And the more people we have that will adopt the platform as we continue to migrate over, the more and more consistent we will be. And like I said, we will never be done, but this is a tool that is already unlocking consistency and will continue to unlock it more and more as we push through our migrations.
Great. We talked a little bit about AI earlier. For any discussions nowadays, it's required, I believe, for you to have an AI section. But that was a big critical to quality item you had when you thought about what your next search platform for knowledge was going to have. So now that you have that and it's in the mix, you got to start thinking about governance, right? It opens up some more issues you have to be thinking about. So how are you ensuring that the franchisees, the employees, that they trust what they're seeing is accurate using this AI and that it's current in Bloomfire?
Yeah, so a couple things here. And number one, you said this earlier, like any discussion you have today has got to have AI in it. And like we needed that in our space. We needed some place where we could be utilizing AI. It's just our technicians expected, our franchisees expected, and it's been a big win. But then you get to governance. We want our technicians to be able to utilize different kinds of content, right? But we don't want them to use different platforms for the content. We don't want them to go onto the web just in general, or to YouTube or Google or wherever it is they want to go. We want to keep them in one platform, and Bloomfire allows us to do that, which is great, because before our search, they had to go looking elsewhere. Then you've got the question of like, well, how do you keep the content up to date? How do you keep it accurate? Bloomfire's got some internal like evaluation and review tools that you can say, hey, I'm going to publish this article now, but remind me in 90 days to do an audit, or remind me in 120 days, or whatever that time frame is. And it will automatically, or it can automatically unpublish that content if it passes out that window. So that's, a phenomenal tool to make sure that we're keeping our content up to date. I don't know if I said this earlier, but when we migrated from our legacy platform, we had 10,000 articles. We had to do a really big review of that content and what we wanted to bring over into Bloomfire, and we ended up bringing over only 3,000 of the articles. So I think that paints a picture of like, not all of it was irrelevant, but a lot of it was bloat. And then some of it was aged, and we'd already added another article that told you the correct process, but the old one wasn't properly deprecated from the platform. So that was a challenge, and Bloomfire allows you to manage that challenge in a way that is sustainable. So we use a hybrid model where our training and instructional design teams own the process, and then subject matter experts review the content and make sure it's current. We also have the ability for people in the field to flag something that they think might be inconsistent or might be incorrect. And that structure really helps us keep our content current.
So, as we kind of come to the end of our time, Jared, brass tacks, this, like we talked about, this is a change management experience for you guys. So, just for perspective for those on the webinar, like how long did this process take to, deploy Bloomfire across the stores that it's in now? And was there anything that surprised you about implementation or support?
Yeah, so I'll say it took longer than I would have liked, but most of that was on our team. Like I said, we had to review those 10,000 articles. We had to get them all migrated over. which Bloomfire helped with. But just the review process took a long time. I think from when we signed the contract to when we gave everybody access for the first time, we were somewhere in like the 4 to 5 months, and that was in beta. We now have everybody with access to the platform, but again, only 115 or so of our stores are using Bloomfire as their sole knowledge management source, where the rest of our platform is using Bloomfire, but ideally, but then they also still have access to those old knowledge base articles and things like that. So we got phase one that went pretty quickly. Phase two is going slower, but it's tied to our end-to-end system migration. I can't say enough though about the Bloomfire project management team. They were phenomenal partners. They were very organized. They didn't overstack our team with to-dos or things like that. They gave us a task and then followed up to make sure we had done it, and they let us focus on what we needed to focus on, which was huge.
Awesome. And as we're coming up on time, maybe 2 quick hit questions for you. So, you're caught in the elevator with the CEO, and the CEO asks, "Hey, what's the biggest thing that this new knowledge management platform provided you that the old system could?" What do you tell that CEO as you're riding up the elevator?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like Bloomfire helped us operationalize knowledge rather than just store it and reduce it to reliance on the memory of the guy who knows, right? It gives us the ability to do work with the things that we've created versus just struggle through.
Awesome. And then, just final thought, like what's next for you in terms of, the knowledge strategy and execution?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we've got about 6 months left on our system migration. And at that point, everybody will be in the Bloomfire platform, which we're really excited about. That'll allow us to be a little bit more pinpointed and a little bit more diligent in exactly what is driving what and making sure that the platform is working the best it can. To be honest, we need to go through and we need to change the way we create content now. Now that we've got this AI-powered search platform, we need to think about different ways that we can deliver information even in better to our frontline employees, and a lot of that will start with how we create it. So we're excited to look into that and making sure that we can continue to keep this ball rolling and keep improving things.
Jared, thank you very much for the transparency, the insight. Thank UBreakiFix for the partnership. I think this discussion hopefully is very valuable to everyone on the call. And thanks to everyone who was able to join us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Madison for a few minutes on some housekeeping things, and then we'll leave for the day. But thanks again, Jared.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks again, Dan and Jared both for joining us and sharing your insight. But and to also all of you who joined our session live today. We hope this conversation gave you practical takeaways on how to reduce frontline friction, improve consistency, and also equip your teams with the right knowledge at the right moment.